Very good afternoon to all of you. Today we are going to discuss about the introduction part of Code of Civil Procedure. As you already are aware of that we have already dealt with the first introductory part. Today we are going to deal with the second introductory part of Code of Civil Procedure. With regard to first part of the introductory part of CPC, it is hereby clarified that we have already dealt with the definition of Code of Civil Procedure. We have also discussed the three different words, that is code, civil and procedure. Thereafter we have discussed about the relationship between constitutional law and code of civil procedure. Thereafter we have discussed the word, the meaning of the word law, and thereafter we have divided the law into two parts, that is substantive law and procedural law, and we have also made the distinction between the substantive law as well as the procedural law. Thereafter I have come to the part, we have come to the next point, that is history of the Code of Civil Procedure, and in which we have discussed from 1859 to 1908, and today we are going to discuss from 1909 till date, and so on and so forth. Thereafter we have also discussed in that particular topic the object behind enacting the Code of Civil Procedure and its applicability. So that was the portion which we have already discussed in the first video lecture on Code of Civil Procedure. Now we are going to start with our second lecture on introductory part, and in this we will deal with the particular aspect from of CPC 1909 and journey from CPC 1909 till date. Let's start with it. CPC 1908 was further amended by Acts of 1951, 1956 and thereafter in 1976. Now the questions which may arise in the mind of a law student, that what was the considerations what was the considerations to be taken up by the central government while enacting these amendments. So the first and the foremost considerations to be kept in by the government at that particular point of time is fair trial, second is speedy trial, and third is access to justice to poor sections of the community who do not have the means to engage a pleader to defend their cases. These were the considerations for the enactment in the year 1976 on, and thereafter the further question may arise, that what were the amendments that took place by the Act of 1976 in the Code of Civil Procedure 1908. The foremost and the most important amendments are: doctrine of res judicata has been made more effective. Now here they have used the word res judicata. What does that mean? Res judicata means, res means thing, and judicata means already adjudicated. Means a particular matter which has already been decided by a competent court, qua a matter which is directly and substantially in issue before that particular forum or particular court, then that matter cannot be re-agitated in another competent court of jurisdiction. Then that matter would be barred by the principle of res judicata. Now come to second point. Power to transfer of a case from one high court to another high court has been given to the Supreme Court. This is the second amendment which was made by 1976 Amendment Act. Third, provisions to file a case against the government has been made less stringent. This was the third amendment. Fourth, scope of summary trial. What do you mean by summary trial? Summary trial means speedy trial. Means the procedure laid down as under the CPC, it is not as strict as laid down under the summary trial. That means we have to save the time. And that was also one of the consideration mentioned previously in my slide. Next point is practice to pass preliminary and final decree in certain suit is abolished. Restrictions are imposed on the right of appeal and revision. Next is written statement and other documents to be filed without delay. By virtue of this Amendment Act, 30 days time was stipulated for filing the WS. And other documents, similar documents. Order 32A has been inserted to provide a special procedure in litigation concerning the affairs of the family. And last, freedom from the attachment of a portion of a salary to all the salaried employees. So these were the certain amendments that took place in 1976. But the aforesaid Amendments Act was not found sufficient, and with a remove the anomalies in deciding the civil cases, a committee was appointed under the chairmanship of Justice Malimat, and on the basis of the recommendations of the said committee, following amendments being carried out in the CPC 1908 in the year 1999 and also in the year 2002. Some of the important amendments are: time limit are prescribed for issuing summons, amendment of pleadings, filing of WS, production of witnesses, etc., etc. New provisions for settlement of dispute outside the court has been introduced. Number of adjournments have been restricted. Provisions for recording of evidence by court commissioner has been made. As far as the adjournments are concerned, now the restrictions is that in a continuous, in a civil case, not more than 3 amendments can be given to one particular side. Courts has been empowered to fix the limit for oral arguments and permitting the written argument to be placed on record by the parties. Scope of first appeal, second appeal has been curtailed by virtue of 1996 and 2002 amendment. As far as the difference between first appeal and second appeal is concerned, first appeal can lie to the immediate superior court. Second appeal, after first appeal, there is a second appeal. So there is a two-tier difference between the trial as well as in the second appeal. And first appeal lies on both on question of fact as well as law, whereas second appeal lies only on the basis of substantial question of law. These certain provisions with regard to first appeal and second appeal, I will be dealing with them in greater detail in the while we were discussing the 4th unit of our syllabus. First appeal can be filed with the copy of judgment, even though decree has not been drawn up by the court. This is also one of the difference, but before the 1976 and 2002. Provisions for recording of evidence by the court commissioner has also been made. This is also one of the amendment of 2002 Act. Now we will go further. What do you mean by the word consolidation and codification? Consolidation means to collect all the laws relating to a particular statute in one law. For example, as you all are aware, before the CPC 1908 came into existence, there were three separate types of law. For example, Hindu persons are governed by their own personal laws with regard to civil matters. Similarly, Muslims were governed by their own personal laws or customs. And Britishers were governed by the principles of justice, equity, and good conscience. That is the principles of the natural justice. So therefore, we have taken from each system the good points in one law, that is known as consolidation, and indirectly we are saying that we are unifying the law of all the three categories of Hindu, Muslims, and Britishers in one law only. That is the purpose behind consolidation. Next word is codification. What is the meaning of codification? Meaning of codification is to make the codification means the law thenceforth be ascertained from the language used in that enactment only and not from the preceding act. We don't have to use any other enactment. As you all are aware, before the existence of 1908 Act, there was 1859 Code, 1863-64 Code, 1877 Code, and thereafter 1882 Code, and thereafter 1908 this new CPC came into force. So for the purpose of the interpretation of this law, the codification is done, and it says for interpretation of this law, you have to go within the bounds of this law. You don't go beyond this law. That is the purpose behind codification. Now, the second question which comes to the mind of a student, of a law student, is what is the scope of 1908 code? So let me clarify at this point of time that this particular law is exhaustive on the matters which are specifically dealt with in it. However, it is not exhaustive on the points which have not been specifically dealt by it. Now, what is the interpretation? How will you give the interpretation to this particular statute? So, as far as the substantive law is concerned, as you all are aware, we have divided the law into two parts, that is substantive law and procedural law. Substantive law provides you the rights and remedy for a cause, whereas the procedural law provides the machinery by which you can exhaust your right or by which you can exercise your right in the court of law, and the court has to follow the procedure laid down therein. Next point. And this one, there are two types of law, substantive law, we have discussed it. And now the next question is, in case of conflict between the two, which will prevail? So there is a Supreme Court judgment on this particular aspect, very, very important judgment. Supreme Court in State of Punjab versus Shyamlal Murari, EIR 1976, Supreme Court 1177. wherein the Justice Krishna Iyer, one of the famous judge of the Supreme Court, has observed that we must always remember that procedural law is not to be tyrant, but a servant, not an obstruction, but an aid to justice. And also observe that procedural prescriptions are handmade and not the mistress, a lubricant, not a resistance in the administration of justice. So from this we can say that procedural law is the servant of substantive law, and in case of conflict between the two, substantive law will prevail over procedural law. Next question which comes to the mind of the law student is, what is the scheme of the code? Unlike many other laws, this is a unique code in which we do not have the sections but we have also the orders. What is the purpose behind making such a law in which there is a duplicacy of work? You may say that there are sections also, there are orders also, and order contains the rules also. So we will go through it. The scheme of the code is divided into two parts, with body of the code containing 158 sections and the first schedule containing orders and 51 orders and rules. The sections deals, now we will come to the point, what is the difference between the sections and the order. The sections deal with the provisions of substantive nature, thereby laying down the general rules of substantive nature, while the order relates to the procedure and the method and the manner in which the jurisdiction may be prescribed, may be exercised. So, from the above, we can say sections provide the substantive law for the principles of the which lays down the general rules for of principles of jurisdiction, whereas how that jurisdiction and the manner in which that jurisdiction may be exercised, that is laid down under the orders of the code. Now, the second question, another question which comes to the mind of the law student are, what if there is a conflict between the provisions of the sections of the code and the orders of the code? Here, the law says if the rules contained in the order are inconsistent with the sections of the code, the latter will prevail. That means the sections of the code will prevail over the orders in case of the conflict between the two. Then what is the reason behind it? The main reason behind it is that sections contain the substantive portion, whereas order contains the procedural part, and as far as and thereby apply the law laid down in the case of State of Punjab versus Shamlal Murari, whereby Krishna Iyer justice said that it is handmaid of justice and not a mistress of justice. Therefore, in the light of the arguments above said, it may be inferred that procedural law is subservient to substantive law. Therefore, orders are subservient to the sections. Now we'll come further also. Now, this is the last slide for today, and in this, we will discuss about whether this law will be treated as retrospective law or prospective law. Before I come to this particular point, I would like to throw the difference between prospective and retrospective. Prospective is, it is continuously from the date of the enforcement of the act, the law will come into existence. And retrospective means if the law is there and the amendment is made on subsequent date, then the retrospective act will say it will apply from the back date. So that is known as retrospective operation. Backdates is the law would be applicable from the backdate. So as far as the procedural law is concerned, in Nani Gopal Mitra versus State of Punjab, AIR 1970, Supreme Court 1636, wherein the Supreme Court has held that procedural laws are always retrospective in operation unless there are good reasons to the contrary laid down under the amendment itself or under the law itself. So that means procedural law may be given retrospective effect if it is specifically provides therein. With this, we have completed our part of the CPC pertaining to the introduction of CPC. Hope you have all enjoyed this lecture. Thank you very much.